it's pretty, unless that guy's got a slick back do and, is wearing some 50s clothes and some wingtips, you're
Hmm.
thinking that guy is definitely going to play some jazz. Because it's the icon and you're in a reenactment at that point, which is the same reason all the classical guitars have to look a particular way, is because that's reenacting a period. They're not playing new music. Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. I'm your host, Jamie Gale. Today on Life with Strings Attached, I'm joined once again by master luthier Michael Greenfield, someone whose work and thinking continues to shape the modern acoustic guitar. In this conversation, we look at how musical inspiration evolves across generations, from the impact of cultural movements like Elvis and the Beatles, and how that influenced so many to pick up the guitar. And we explore how those early inspirations intersect with the changing needs of today's aging musicians, players who once chased volume and power, but are now seeking lighter, more responsive instruments that match where their bodies and hands are today. Then Michael shares something essential about his own journey. After decades of refining his approach, the guitars he's making today are the best he's ever made. A lifetime of repair work, research, and obsessive problem solving has led him to instruments that are more stable, more playable, and more expressive than anything he's ever made. It's a conversation about inspiration, evolution, and the ongoing pursuit of excellence. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Michael Greenfield, and I hope that you do as much as I did. Hey, Michael. Welcome to the
Hey,
show.
thank you. Good afternoon. Good morning for me.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's true. Thanks for being on Life with Strings Attached. How's life
Oh,
there in
thank you for
Montreal?
having me. It's always such a joy to be here.
Hmm. Yeah. Is it properly winter back in Montreal now?
Not yet,
You
but
have snow yet?
it's coming. No, we had pretend snow, not real snow.
Pretend snow.
But
Okay.
yeah, next week we're finally getting to wintry temperatures. We've been above zero centigrade, above zero. So
Right. Right. Okay. Right. Great. Yeah, I don't know if it's just because I'm Canadian that I get to see these videos, or if the rest of the world gets to see like Montreal catastrophes in the wintertime of buses sliding down hills and sort of having no grip with the ice and snow. Or
well, you get to see them, we get to live them.
yeah, right. Of course. So it's a unique environment you're in because you're on an island and you're between water in every direction, more or less,
Mhm.
right? And so
Right,
you get the benefits of when it's blowing north and when it's blowing south, east and
right.
west.
Is the word benefits like in quotes the benefits?
Well, it's I like to take a positive view on life.
Mhm. You have to embrace where you are.
Indeed, and I like snow. You know, I
Mhm.
uh, I still choose to be in Canada in the wintertime. Because it's much of the rest of the environment around the world, unless you go to the southern hemisphere, it just gets gray and
Mhm.
rainy. And one of the things that we get in where I live, and I think where you live is also in Canada, is that we actually get a lot of sunshine with the snow. We get
Mhm.
beautiful blue skies and bright sunshine, but snow. And where Zach is, for instance, in Strasbourg or Vancouver, they just get like months and months and months of gray and wetness.
Yeah.
I'll take snow and sunshine over gray and wetness any day.
Oh, I agree. I'm fortunate because of what we do that I get to speak to
Hmm.
people around the world and Montreal, Canada, but specifically in Montreal, we have four distinct seasons.
Hmm.
As opposed to people who live in other areas, maybe they have one long season that goes for
Yes.
365 days. Um, so the four distinct seasons are fun. I mean, they of course have their challenges, but it's fun. And I agree, winter and snow is awesome. The caveat is living in a big city, having to commute to get to and from work. If you
Yeah.
don't have to leave your house after you get a meter of snow and you could just open the windows or the blinds or the drapes and look out at the big puffy snowflakes with your mug of hot chocolate or a crisp glass of Chardonnay, go, gee, isn't this nice? And it is, it's
Yes.
wonderful. But like having to dig your car out under a snowbank and then trudge through slush and ice, less fun.
And therein lies the difference of our current Canadian experiences. I grew up in Toronto where I did have to do that all the time and drive through bad weather, hours of commute often when I was younger. But these days I do live on a lake in the middle of nowhere. And when it snows, I take a glass of wine or a coffee and I look out at the snow and think of how beautiful it is. But it doesn't turn gray and slushy like it does in the city. It just remains white and beautiful until it's gone. So
Anyway, we're not quite there yet, but we're in agreement that under the right conditions, winter is amazing.
We can be amazing. Yes, yes. So, thanks for accepting my invitation to be on the show, Michael. I know that you are a very conscious guitar maker, and although that may sound ridiculous to many people, I just mean that there's very little that you do that you haven't considered very, very well, perhaps obsessed about for a very long period of time before it came to be released to the public. And I've just come off the road with the Boutique Guitar Showcase, and I'm noticing some major shifts in areas. And so I scheduled a few podcast conversations with people who have been working within these spaces for a long period of time. And I'm wondering what you're seeing from your perspective. And so let me sort of describe to you some of the major shifts I've seen. One is that there's a definitive closing for me of the era, the movement that is defined by the rock and roll era, let's just sort of say. So starting with perhaps Elvis Presley, the Beatles, succinctly on through a life where you might have been inspired to play guitar because you saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, or Bob Dylan or Jimi Hendrix or something, Kingston Trio, all this kind of stuff. That music has been greatly explored. There's a lot of incredible musical instruments out there that already exist to reenact those moments. And frankly, if you're 70, 80 years old, which is where the people who were at the beginning of that movement are these days, their fingers don't quite work the way they do. They're not so excited about picking up a Marshall or an Ampeg as they used to be. They're looking for lighter sort of experiences, even like a heavy arch top or a traditional sort of rosewood guitar. They might be more keen to have a lighter mahogany guitar these days or something, because weight, the effects on your fingers, all of these things are, challenges at this point. And so, and then what we're seeing on the Boutique Guitar Showcase tour is that everything Headless and Multiscale sold first, fast, and in multiples. Anything novel, anything that is not the traditional guitar. Now, I know everyone thinks that everything we do is a traditional guitar, but we have guitars that are more towards center, is what I call them. And then we have guitars that are way out there. But in general, these headless guitars, the multi-scale guitars, they didn't sell to kids. They sold to people between 50 to 80 years old. And I didn't get the people looking at them going, I don't know who'd ever play this. What do you need that for? We got more sort of genuine, like, tell me about this. I'd like to know. They weren't dismissive about it in the same way that they used to be. And it was a really marked difference for me, someone who spends every year getting out on the road across multiple cultures talking about guitars. To me, it was a substantial shift. It's no longer a question to me. And so as someone who has been experimental and curious in your work, I'd like to say unromantic. I think that you're a pragmatist, and when this solution proves itself to be better, you will adopt what you prove to be better rather than hang on to traditional joint or construction method, something of the sort. You'll happily embrace something that proves itself. And you were one of the first acoustic guitar makers, living acoustic guitar makers, who embraced the multiscale choices as well. And you've recently made some releases about some of the new construction techniques that you're putting into some of your available guitars, also with a new model release. So, Michael, I said a lot. So, setting the stage, novelty was what was desired. The things that probably there's already a great existing library of musical instruments in the used marketplace, in their closets, whatever, was much less desirable on tour this year. What do you have to say to that as somebody who's steeped in history but has always had an eye on the future? If you accept my description.
I do, and I understand it. I'm hesitant only in that you might very well be much more qualified to answer the question than I am, because my view is from right here. I other than the once a year perhaps that I leave the workshop to go to some show, I see the people who I see on a Zoom chat, much like this. I correspond with my customers by email, and that's the extent of it. I come to work and I go home. So I'm very sequestered. I'm very insulated, and I live very much in my world. And that world, as you described, through my curiosity, but it's a world that I have created. I've created the instruments that I craft, and I'm true to the ethos and mission statement of my brand. So even when I incorporate new technologies or new techniques or a new feature into my work, it's important to me, because I've worked for decades to develop an individual voice, or at least I think it's an individual voice. And the reality is, while not as long as it used to be, I do have quite a long waiting list. And those folks who have been waiting for 4 years to receive their instrument are expecting something that they're familiar with, and I can't deliver something. Well, what's this? This doesn't sound or feel or look at all like what I was expecting. So I need to be sensitive to that. That's the preamble. As far as what you just described, it's curious. Yes, the reality is that there are more and more instruments, not necessarily mine, although mine included, that are available on the used market. As our client base, let's face it, it's the boomers, right? As they continue to age, eventually they get out of the collecting game and they liquidate collections. And then all of a sudden there's just this mass of instruments available on the used market. So it's an opportunity for some to get in at a lower price point to acquire one of your older instruments. And while they're wonderful instruments, not just mine, any of my colleagues and peers, they don't necessarily represent what we're doing today. And I often have said and described to my customers and certainly to artists, just like a guitarist, the longer they play, if they practice on a daily basis, hopefully after 2, 3, 5, 20 years, you're a better player at age 60 or 70 than you were at age 40 or 50. Not necessarily facility, but musicality and what comes across. And for some, facility as well. So there's a balancing act there, in that I feel that the guitars I'm making today are the best I've ever produced. And I'm sure many of my peers feel the same about their work, just for those reasons. And hopefully, even though I've always paid attention to it, they're more stable and they play better and all of those things. So it's in many ways a safer investment. The other thing is that while I'm very grateful for all of the working musicians and touring artists who choose to commission one of my guitars and then take it out on the road and earn their living with it, many of my customers are school teachers and auto mechanics, just regular day-to-day people. So for them, this is a once-in-a-lifetime purchase, or maybe two. And then, of course, there are high net worth individuals who are enamored with the guitar, be it the object that is the guitar or the musical instrument, or both, and not only own multiples of my instruments, but that of my friends and colleagues as well. So, not to de-romanticize it, but a guitar is a guitar is a guitar. And when there's something new and exciting, well, people want the new and exciting as well. And for those that have the means, those 50, 60, 70-year-olds with disposable income, you know, they come in and they see a headless fan fret electric guitar with an interesting aesthetic that doesn't look like a Telecaster. Not that there's anything wrong with the Telecaster, right? They go, oh, I think I'll do this now for a little while. And they still have their black guard or their white guard Tele, because you need that. And likewise with acoustic instruments, you know, the era of rock and roll, I don't know if it's over. But for the purpose of this conversation, let's just say that music is fluid, and as a fashion, it's always changing. And with the change, it's like few, if any, are buying pointy headstock guitars anymore and wearing spandex with big puffy hair. That we've moved on from since the 80s, so people are looking for a different aesthetic. Sonically, just to continue along the electric, you know, realm, people aren't playing refrigerator racks with, you know, multi-choruses and panning delays and PCM, whatever, you know, lexicons. They are maybe in a different way, but the point is, even all those studio cats have moved on from that. There are other ways of achieving that and new sounds. So I would morph that over into my acoustic world, in that the classic era American-made guitars, for the most part, globally, although not exclusively, but for the most part, have been, and in many worlds continue to be, the benchmark of acoustic guitar tone. But certainly since the late 1980s, there's been a progression of modern fingerstyle, and the demands of the instrument and the expectation of voice have changed. So people are looking for that as well. And finally, anyone who buys either vintage electric or acoustic guitars knows, often when purchasing these guitars, there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done to get them really to be able to deliver their full potential. It could be a neck reset and maybe a replacement bridge, because at some point in its life, the bridge has been shaved down and the geometry has changed and the fretwork is terrible, and on and on and on. Sometimes fingerboards need to be replaced. And, you know, it's like if you bought a 1980s Porsche 911 with the original tires on it, why would you want to drive that? You know, it's like,
Right.
Adjust the suspension, put new tires on it, make sure the steering isn't working, and boy, are you going to have a good time. Well, you know, buy your 1929 OM28 and make sure the neck angle is correct and the frets are doing what they're supposed to, and man, is that thing going to sound great. Well, if properly executed, a modern guitar won't have all of those challenges, and often they play and sound better. They might play and sound different because the current expectation of voice in a modern fingerstyle guitar is not that of a 20s or 30s Martin or Gibson. So I would say that, you know, well, the electric guitar crowd are looking for different things. The acoustic guitar crowd are also looking for different things for different reasons. Sometimes it's a musical goal. Sometimes it's an aesthetic goal, I think. Does that sort of touch some of those points?
Yeah, some of those themes are there, and I don't mean to say that these instruments are not going to be valuable by any means, nor that the genres of music that were played on them are irrelevant. But at a certain point in time, you hit a critical mass of exploration. In the early days, it's very tangential. It's not even hard to identify. If we go back to the early days of what we now call rock and roll, there were artists that were playing together that we've now defined into different categories that we would never put on the same stage now. For instance, a Johnny Cash with an Elvis Presley. Now Johnny Cash is in the genre of country and Elvis Presley's in the genre of rock and roll. But at the time, there was no such thing. They hadn't been defined as such yet. So it was new music. And so, but once we put them into their buckets and we narrow in on what defines that particular genre or that particular style and the sounds associated with it, then we explore particular ideas until there's kind of nothing more to say. And the rock and roll era was still swinging in the rhythm section, and it was still based a lot in 3/4. We hadn't switched to 4/4 until we kind of hit the more sort of straight up rock era at that point in time. And so rock from the very beginning has constantly evolved. I mean, the difference from Elvis Presley in 1957 to what was happening with the Beatles in 1967, 10 years later, or the Beatles from 63 to 1970, their whole catalog is 7 years. It's remarkable to see how much it all changed within a pretty short period of time. And by 1970, when Let It Be comes out, Black Sabbath is releasing their first album. And to put the Beatles and Black Sabbath onto the same moment in time is hard for people to reconcile now, decades and decades later on. But that's how fast this whole sort of explosion of ideas happened. But now here we are, where Ozzy Osbourne played his final show and then passed away shortly thereafter. Everybody came together to celebrate this birth of heavy metal. We recognize rock and roll and rock. These things are... We've kind of said everything there is to say within it. Doesn't mean we won't keep playing it. We're still playing classical music from 300 years ago, and we will reenact this music. But when you go to a professional symphony orchestra, they're primarily playing instruments that are also very old at this point in time. And they, just like you said, have been fixed. As a matter of fact, these highly regarded Stradivarius violins, they're not even the same scale length that Stradivarius made them. They're all they're all changed. As a matter of fact, it's interesting to consider for a moment. Let's not go too far down this rabbit trail here, but that this highly regarded Stradivarius violin isn't even the violin he actually made effectively, because the scale length makes a substantial difference. The sound post, the scaling, all the things that happen to those. And I'm not an expert in vintage violins, but the point is, to your point, why would you buy an 80s, have an 80s Porsche and not put some new tires on it, adjust the suspension in the same way that, play your 50s Telecaster? But for God's sake, it's okay to replace the frets. The thing has to function. And so we're going to continue to play this music because a lot of great music was made during these periods. But there is a question to say, how many more instruments of this era need to be made in order to sustain a reenactment period for decades and centuries to come? If we look at things historically, there are societies meant to sustain the value of these things. We have classical music societies, folk societies, blues music societies, jazz societies. It is conceivable that there will be parents sitting around one day talking about, your kid doesn't know how to play Enter Sandman. What kind of a father are you? And moms making cookies and raising money to make sure the kids know the music of Metallica. That sounds ridiculous today, but if we look at history, it's actually more likely that's going to happen than that is not going to happen, because there is such a great body of work built around it. And that is what we do. We come together, we say, this is worth remembering, this is worth sustaining. People will get behind it, put money in and means into it. So let's sort of tie that up to sort of say, I'm not against it. I'm not proclaiming any great death, but I'm saying that the moment of exploration and tangential thinking has been mostly refined. We know what it is. You can go and, if you're using an actual distortion pedal, and frankly, a lot of people have moved on to something like a neural DSP, quad cortex, if you put in distortion of some sort And there's a blues setting, there's a rock setting, there's a heavy metal setting. We all know exactly what that's supposed to fucking sound like. And if we switch the names, we'd all be, that's not a, because we've defined it. It's been defined. It's been explored. And so I think that we're at the stage where the industry that evolved around all of this music and musical instruments and guitar as our particular subject matter has potentially created the critical mass that is necessary. And God bless Reverb. David called bloody brilliant, seeing that the used market was bigger than the new market, to be able to care for those instruments, and they will be able to play that music far into the future. Now, that doesn't mean that the music stopped. It continued to evolve just like it did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s onwards. And there's still new forms of rock music, synthesis of bringing these instruments together and musics together, technological changes, which is what a lot of that was in the first place. We get to lower and lower instruments. I know that you make instruments that are greater than 6 strings. Also people want extended ranges. And part of that has to do with the fact that we have a microphone that can actually capture it and speakers that can actually reproduce it. We have technology that allows us to go into that space that we couldn't before. And that opens up new possibilities. And what I'm seeing today is that people are interested in exploring those new possibilities. And there's another group of people that are interested in reenacting the great moments from the past. But those two things are never equal. We're either in a moment of futurism, we're going to the moon, right? We have TV dinners, all of these things about the great new future we're going to have, or we're in a period of things were better back then. And right now, I feel like the guitar is in a movement of curiosity and exploration, and that novelty is and new possibilities is on the rise, and the reenactment of such things will be sustained. But historically, if we look at the law of diffusion of innovation, that historical reenactment will end up somewhere around 16%. It gets there. It doesn't just overnight, bam. But it will decline and be sustained by roughly 16% of the marketplace will continue to do that. And there's a heck of a lot of violins and symphony orchestras still happening today. There's not as many archtop jazz guitars happening today as there once was, but there's still some, and there's still people playing music on those instruments and such. So in response to your response, I just want to clarify that I'm not proclaiming the death or irrelevance of these existing instruments. But at some point in time, I think we have to accept that we've hit a critical mass of the instruments necessary to reenact it. And that we will be able to grow new possibilities. And so before I pass this back to you, I'm going to set you up for this next one to say, you talked about the needs changing for the acoustic guitar players somewhere around the 1990s or late 1980s. And it's been my observation. 2 years ago, I had to give a talk at the Fretboard Summit in the Acoustic Cafe for the Gallup School about the unwritten future guitar, which I have always interwoven electric and acoustic. But since it was called Acoustic Cafe, I felt like, I should really just make this about acoustics. And I had to try and remove electric guitar from the scenario. And I can't. And you are one of these examples, actually. These people who are these modern fingerstyle gymnastic players typically are actually coming from electric or even drums. They're coming from another musical experience and they're applying it towards the acoustic guitar. And they had different expectations of fidelity, of playability, of responsiveness. And that is shaping the modern acoustic, and it has been since the late 1980s, early 1990s. It is a synthesis of a Dreadnought and a Stratocaster that defines the modern acoustic guitar. We're less concerned about competing with the banjo in volume. We're more concerned about extreme responsiveness to light input, so we can play more for longer, faster, greater stretches, all of these things, which I think those expectations came from playing electric guitar. Now, back to you, Michael.
It's a very difficult. I don't think there's a simple answer, because there are so many touch points all wrapped up in this question.
Mm-hmm.
And the bottom line, not to oversimplify things, is that these are tools used to create and recreate music.
Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com.
The Gregorian chant is not irrelevant. It continues to be relevant. There might not be people actively performing the work, but that informed the centuries and generations and centuries and generations moving forward. You know, Scagliari and his work informed Elvis Presley because the theory and vocabulary of music continues to evolve. And if you listen to or read a biography or listen to an interview of any, well, certainly great musician, these are all musicologists. The depth of their knowledge is unbelievable. And they just refer to and cite all those who came before. You know, look what Chris Thiele just released, that Bach thing. I was listening to it last night. It's unbelievable. So music continues to be relevant. And he's playing that repertoire on a 1920s Lohr era mandolin. So unconventional. So let's forward that into our conversation. We just went through this whole rubber bridge thing where everybody was converting guitars to rubber bridge guitars, and it's cool. and I love it. It's great. It's another color on the palette. And all of these are colors on the palette. And some people will find a new color and maybe paint some kind of experimental, I hesitate to use the word modernist work, and that's great. So it's something new. And some people will take that color and they'll incorporate it into a more classical work or paint a flower with it.
Sure.
And I think music is very much the same. You know, how many 1950s and 60s, we don't need to name an artist, 1950s and 60s pop tunes have been reimagined in the last 15 years and some kind of an interesting cover done. So, and some of the things that, some of what has made that interesting cover interesting might have been the choice of tools they've used to recreate the music.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it can be a metal tune performed completely on acoustic instruments. And maybe some of those acoustic instruments were a small-bodied early 20th century parlor guitar and something with a rubber bridge on it. So, you know, I don't think there are any rules. And, you know, I'm hesitating because there's just all of these things going on in my head. Yes, artists and people who play music are inspired by the instrument that you hand them. And for me as a guitar maker, the most rewarding thing is delivering an instrument either to somebody who sits at home and records or somebody who's on concert stages around the world. And, you know, they're given an instrument and they record a new album, right? They write 10 songs, one after the other. And it's like, boom, all of this music was hiding inside this guitar, waiting to come out. guitar or piano or
Yes.
trumpet or whatever the tool is. So that's
Yeah.
great. It's an inspiration thing, but that same thing can happen with that 1914 Washburn.
Yeah, sure.
And I know it's moving away from, people are buying headless guitars and fan fret instruments, and depending on what your repertoire is, I have these conversations with people who commission instruments for me. Should I get a fan fret? What should the scale length be, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as we know, fan fret guitars go back to the 16th century, 1500s.
Multiscale instruments.
The Ortharian was created in 1540, I believe. That was the
No. I'm just pushing my own agenda, Michael. I'm on a mission to abolish the term fan fret, unless we're actually talking about how you put in your frets. Otherwise, the instruments are multiscale instruments. The frets are a byproduct of a multiscale instrument.
It's just a name. That's fine. Anyway, all of that's.
So they're asking you whether they should get something that's a multiscale instrument or not.
The point is, yes, we've learned how to do certain things, and we have technologies that allow us to do it very accurately. But along with that, with our advancement as a craft, if we are carefully paying attention to the math and the physics, we are able to make musical instruments, in my case, guitars, that play more in tune than they ever have in the past. And, since the mid-19th century, the Spanish guitar, which is effectively the guitar that we're all playing, be it a dreadnought or whatever, if you're playing within the range of standard tuning, they work fine. Yes, there are advantages to fan fret or multi-scale guitars, but the question is, what are the musical goals that you want to achieve? And, a lot of people who come to me want fan fret guitars because multi-scale guitars, whatever. Because I'm known for that. I'm one of the, as you said earlier, that's what I'm known for. So it's more than half of my production. Although, interestingly, I see a switch going a little bit more back to the conventionally fretted instruments. So, it may completely be irrelevant because just depending on the mix of orders, how they come. It's like this year, interestingly, almost every guitar I've made is a Model G2. Next year, I don't have a single one. So go figure.
Now let's caveat that for a second, or put a note on that, because the guitars you're building this year were all ordered 4 to 5 years ago.
4 years ago.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
4 years ago. And were the specs confirmed 4 years ago?
Yep.
Or do you sort of get a... Okay, so what I'm more curious to know is new orders that are coming in, are they representative of the same thing? When you look 4 years ahead, which you might not currently remember as much as what you're currently working on. But my last conversation was the same issue, is that guy has a 3-year waiting list. And so he's building what people wanted kind of 3 years ago, versus today's. And those would be 3 years from now.
It's been this way. Okay, not for 30 years, but certainly for 20 years. I've had 3 to 4 year waiting list, pretty consistent. And for as long as I remember, it's like sometimes this is the guitar that's selling a lot, and sometimes that's the guitar that's selling a lot. I can't explain it. I've never been able to explain it. But the point is that I seem to be seeing a little bit. I'm making slightly fewer multi-scale instruments now, but that could change in a year. When I look at what is on the wall as far as my work for the year, next year, maybe 17 out of 18 guitars are all going to be multi-scale instruments or not. I mean, I know that I'm continuing to take those
Yeah.
orders, so the point is, in my acoustic guitar world, I don't know. I don't see what you're describing, which doesn't, invalidate what you're seeing. It just means, as I said right at the very beginning, I live in a very insular world. I make Michael
Yeah.
Greenfield guitars. And while, as also you pointed out early on, I try to be a thoughtful person. And I don't make any secret of the fact that I've been and
Yeah.
continue to be a big student of the great guitars that came before us, particularly 1920s and 30s Gibsons and Martins. Martin certainly has not changed their aesthetic. They changed very little. They've been working on their recipe for almost 200 years. And that's what they do. And I've always thought, and many of the great Spanish masters, they develop a rosette, they develop a peg head, they have a particular look and a voice, and they will tweak to optimize that voice and make it as efficient and as good as possible through their career. But they've been working on their recipe. So early on from the start, I've been working on my recipe. In the 1990s, my purfling and rosette hasn't changed since then. My peg head hasn't changed since the late 1990s. I sort of, okay, that's my aesthetic. My goal was, if somebody is standing on stage in a concert hall, the guy in the shitty seats in the last row can say, oh, he's playing one of Michael Greenfield's guitars. That was my goal. But what I had, so I don't, when people, oh, I'd like this peg head and this rosette, could you do that? Sorry, I'm the wrong guy for you. That's not where my focus is. I have a look. And my focus is completely under the hood. How's it gonna go around a corner? How fast can we drive it around the corner before it slides off the road? And all the other automotive analogies. So
Yeah, sure.
I've never tried, not never tried. I don't try to make anything visually striking other than the beauty of the guitar itself and my ability as a woodworker. Whereas there are people today, and not a criticism, I know that there are people like every rosette is unique and every peg head is a different shape and every guitar is a one-off. And if they can execute it, that's wonderful. That's really great. But I've spent my career working on the recipe, just like, does it need a little bit more salt? Does it need a little bit more mass under the bridge? Maybe yes, maybe no.
Okay, let's dive into this for a little bit. Let's dive into,
Sure.
Unless you have a point to resolve specifically there, I would love to dive into that issue a little bit better.
Sure.
Because one of our guitar makers that we work with, I think you know him. I think you know who Uli Teufel is. You might even know Uli. You might have met him in Berlin or something. Uli wrote an article that we published on our website recently called The Intentional Guitar. And he made a proposition in this article that I had never really properly considered before. And that was the effects of patents and copyrights on the guitar.
Interesting.
And that the law demands diversity because you're not allowed to make someone else's guitar. And as a result of it, the Spanish guitar, the violin, pre-copyright and patent law, had multitudes of people in multiple generations refining it down to what it is. And that we can't have that happen. He doesn't make, I'm extrapolating what he says so that we can't have that happen, but he just gives the information. And ultimately, in our current status, it means that we can't have that happen, actually. because of the enforcement of patents and copyright laws, that we can't refine a single instrument to arrive at the ultimate X version of guitar, which I thought was really fascinating. And if we live and die with that, and those are respected / enforced over a long period of time, it really brings up this idea of, is this the right direction, but no one can go down that path because it's been cut off and there's a big dog or a lawyer or a security guard or a military gate that tells us you can't enter anymore, you can't work in this direction. And that's got to be a problem. I don't want to focus on the problem too much, but that's interesting, right? Like, you're working on your own recipe, and that's great. And maybe you're doing the absolute best. But the point, and maybe you have no interest in working within someone else's space, but the point is you can't legally. And so if you want to adopt certain things, there's limitations as to how close you can actually get there. And so that has to be inhibiting the refinement of the instrument. On the flip side, it demands diversity and tangential sort of thinking, which means that we get into all sorts of different spaces. What do you have to say about that? Is that the first time you're hearing such a thought? And does it trigger any ideas?
I find Uli's comment fascinating and in many ways very much true. And it's probably, I mean, and look what he's done. It's, your head explodes. So he's certainly living his statement. Maybe it's a little bit less true in the acoustic guitar world, because for the most part, I remember early on, mid 1990s, I was talking to the late great Frank Ford, because I was making guitars at the time, but I hadn't developed my own instrument yet, and I wanted to. I was making OMs and dreadnoughts and advanced jumbos and J200s and the regular J185s. And I said, Frank, what should I be building? Because from my repair days, I knew Frank. And he said, build a D28. I said, but everybody builds a D28. He said, exactly. Because that's what the players want. So, his perspective as a music store owner and somebody who comes across at the time in the United States some of the greatest guitars ever made, he said, that's what people want. Build what people want. Now, I didn't build D28s moving forward. I created my own body shape, derivative of, the Canadian style, Jean Larrivée school of thought, where I took my classical shape and I puffed it out into what became my G1, and then I puffed out my G1 into a G2. So they all sort of look the same. So the first thing is, I didn't make a triangular instrument. I made an object that looked very much in the tradition of the Spanish guitar. And most of the guitars being made globally, acoustic guitars, are very much in the tradition of the Spanish guitar. It's an instantly recognized instrument. The majority, not exclusively. Some of the modern fingerstyle guitars, the waist has been moved in relation to the sound hole. How it sits in your lap is different. The shoulders at the top of the guitar are a little bit different. Some people say, it has the California look. Okay. It's still kind of a Spanish guitar, very much so. So it's not that of the electric world where, one or two of the major manufacturers are going to come after you. And in fairness, I don't believe, I mean, this is unsubstantiated, the guy who's making a dozen or even 50 electric guitars a year, they're not going to waste their time or resources chasing them on patent, violation. They might send a letter, but another manufacturer who's making hundreds, possibly thousands of guitars, they're going to protect their patent. And the operative word is protect.
Well, there are companies who shut down the small guy also. There's a couple of them in particular. And this this comes from, just 1 second, a caveat on this, because it relates to the patent law thing, is there is a perspective within American law that says in order for your patent to be valid, you must enforce it equally, whether they're having thousands or 10. You can't choose to not enforce it on 10, a guy who makes 10, but enforce on someone who makes 1,000. And so there are people who say we have to send everyone a cease and desist letter, and if they don't do it, we have to then take further action. And so there are lawyers for some of these companies who literally walk the aisles of the NAM floor, letting anybody know who they think infracts on that, and of all sizes. I know because I get the emails. Jamie, I got the letter from this. They see me as someone who might know something about it. You know?
in the early 2000s, I developed a technology for a double-top concert classical guitar with the help of Evan Davis, who's an acoustic physicist. He's involved in the Violin Society of America right now, and the Oberlin Society. And I don't know if he was involved in the Catgut Acoustical Society. I met him through Linda Manzer. He was working with Linda back in the day. Anyway, we had a good time, and I developed this concentric ring between two thin vibrating membranes, and it was really cool. And it was, to the best of our understanding, a new technology. And with the help of some people I know, I did look into the possibility of patenting it. And I very quickly abandoned that, because the thing is, you know, getting the patent itself isn't that difficult, and it's not particularly expensive. What is expensive is protecting it. And if some manufacturer decided to adopt it, I'm not going to spend $100,000 chasing them. I can't even spend $10,000 chasing them. So for the small shop maker, the reality of protecting technologies and ideas, you know, just some of the trademarks I have, my peghead, my rosette, etc., I can't protect that. And frankly, over the last several decades, I've seen my design and my work everywhere, which is very flattering. And every now and again, you know, the people who taught me, like Grit Laskin with his armrest and his rib rest, and I don't do it, but Linda's wedge design, others adopt. Neither of them are chasing anybody. And when I asked Grit to teach me how to do his armrest, he said he just wants, you know, acknowledgement. Just cite his work. So I quote him, and that's all that we really expect. But unfortunately, that's not going on. But my point being, the small shop guys, unless you're making something look exactly like a 1950s J185 with a Gibson peghead, and everything's the same other than the logo, okay, more than likely somebody's going to come. Well, Gibson will come after you, because that's their trademark, that's their IP. So just to circle back to what all of this means, I've worked hard over the decades to develop what I believe is a unique body shape, or it certainly was at the time that I've developed it. And as I said earlier, I've been dedicating the rest of my career to refining the recipe. Everything, what I refer to as the invisible guitar. And Uli talked about, you know, intent, and I talk about my AI, which is acoustic intent. And that's how I design all of my guitars. So yes, I do constantly strive to push the instrument forward. I don't think, because of what I do, I was certainly influenced by the Spanish guitar. We all have in the acoustic guitar world. You know, I guess the Dreadnought is the Fender Stratocaster, right? In the acoustic guitar world, it's the ubiquitous electric guitar. Right, or Les Paul or Telecaster. It's, you know, the OM, the Dreadnought, and I'm decidedly making neither of those. I have my own shape, so I moved away. But it's not as far away from the OG as Uli's work or Strandberg or somebody else.
Right. Sure.
From, you know, from a Telecaster. My moving the instrument forward is, as I've said already, is moving the voice forward, moving the ease of playability forward, moving the comfort forward, moving the stability forward, so that these instruments, when they get passed down from generation to generation, have longevity and will survive. And I'm fortunate to have people playing these guitars on concert stages and touring annually, like all over the globe. And the fact that I don't get telephone calls saying, hey, I'm having a problem, tells me this is working, which is great. And then every few years, when somebody shows up, they're in Montreal and they come by the shop and I look at their instrument and take some measurements, lo and behold, it's exactly the way it was when it left my shop. So, I check that box that, okay, those things that I've been focusing on seem to be working. And as far as the voice, I'm my most harsh critic. I'm the guy who hates everything I do, but I'm actually pleased with the way things are progressing. So while I totally agree with Uli, but it's a little bit different in the acoustic guitar world, or at least my acoustic guitar world. I'm sure there are people out there making very unconventional acoustic instruments, and hopefully they play and sound great. And I'm sure some of them do.
Yeah, there's less experimentation in the, let's say, no, not less experimentation, less deviation, let's see, from established norms within the acoustic guitar world.
Here's a good example. Sorry for interrupting you, Jamie.
The structure is just simply more fragile, and therefore the cost to getting it wrong means, implosion. Differently than it does in an electric guitar.
There are a couple of different things. So the first thing is, to quote Bob Taylor, I mean, he was the first I'm aware of who said it out loud, although we all know it. Much more so than bracing or anything else, the biggest influence on the voice of a guitar is the shape. A J200 is never going to sound like an LWO. Never. Make it 8 inches deep, same bracing, everything, never going to sound the same. That body shape, the tightness of the waist, where it is, where the sound hole is, all of that, much more so than bracing, is going to influence the voice. So part of the expectation of an acoustic guitar is it has to, I'm not going to say look, it has to be shaped a certain way to have a certain sound. That's the A part. The B part, somewhat in the archtop world, until recently at least, and very much so in the classical guitar world, these instruments can be super high tech with all kinds of crazy stuff in science going on hidden behind the curtain.
Yeah. Yes,
as long as it looks like a Torres.
Yes.
And in the right, double tops and carbon fiber, this and that, and balsa wood and whatever, and it looks like a Ramirez.
Right.
More or less. And that's because that's what the market expects. And, if you change it too much, they go, the best example years ago, before I did my first guitar show, so 1996, somewhere around there, I was talking to Linda Manzer saying, hey, I'm going to do my first guitar show. What do I have to know? What should I do? And she gave me a whole very wise list of things to do. And one of them was the guitar needs to look great, because that's what's going to get them to walk over to your table. And back then it was the years of the Long Island Guitar Show, which was the archtop show in North America. It's now defunct. And I had a few archtop guitars with me because back then I was making archtop guitars. And I had one which was a transparent green, graduated burst like green, quilted maple guitar. It was pretty striking. And so many people, including the great Pat Metheny, came over to my table to play that guitar. This isn't about Pat Metheny. I'm just saying it got a lot of people over to the table. And more than one person said, "Oh, this is really great. Can you do this in a sunburst?" Because they wanted it to look like an L5. So
Yeah.
I mean, that was 30 years ago or 25 years ago.
30 goes to, you're already in a reenactment period. There's nobody new playing jazz archtop guitar at that point in time. And so you have to wear a certain kind of clothes, you have to be in a certain environment, and you have to play a certain kind of guitar, just like your classical people. We're already reenacting at that point. But I don't think that you would have had that problem from a Charlie Christian, and you wouldn't have had that problem from a different kind of guitar, but a Django Reinhardt. Those guys wouldn't have been, this has to look a particular kind of way, in the same way.
Well, but look at Ed Bickert and what's his name? Lenny Bro,
His
right?
Lofsky. Yeah.
Well, Lofsky, but Lofsky's playing archtops though, isn't he? I was going to say these are guys who are playing solid body.
Ibanez,
yeah,
Lofsky, last time I heard, was playing on Ibanez Roadstar 2. Like, he is so anti.
But Bickert was a Telecaster guy, right? Bickert was playing.
Yeah, exactly.
Unconventional. They were just playing jazz repertoire, and they were looking for a tool to develop their vocabulary, which they did better than most. So
yes, but the icon still exists somewhere else. If you're at a club somewhere or a cafe and you see a band is setting up and someone pulls out a 175, you think you're going to hear a certain kind of music. Like, it's pretty, unless that guy's got a slick back do and is wearing some 50s clothes and some wingtips, you're thinking that guy is definitely going to play some jazz. Because it's the icon, and you're in a reenactment at that point, which is the same reason all the classical guitars have to look a particular way, is because that's reenacting a period. They're not playing new music, typically. This space is normally reserved for brands who make stories like this possible, like the Dario and the Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop. If your company belongs in this conversation, let's talk. We partner with brands who value craft, culture, and the quiet power of a well-placed idea.
The interesting thing, I know we're way off topic, but the interesting thing is...
There's no topic.
Okay,
this is just life.
The thing is, to what I said earlier, talking to the players and what we do as guitar makers and what they do as musicians is the same.
Yeah.
Some of the concert classical guitar players I've made guitars for are very concerned that the guitar looks a certain way, because if they show up with something weird, their audience won't take them seriously. They're concerned about how they look in front of their audience, just as we're concerned how our instruments look in front of our audience. It's the same. The guy who wants the archtop guitar that looks like an L5, I did say at the time, because I remember, I said, yeah, but the green guitar got you over to the table, and what you do for a living is you're an entertainer. Like, why don't you want the gold glitter guitar that, cover it in mirrors, make it look like a mirror ball? Worked for Paul Stanley. He's an entertainer. Now, easier with an electric instrument than covering an acoustic instrument in mirrors, let's say. But I think for some, there's a certain amount of convention. And circling back to your original statement, that guy who's 60 and 70 years old, and maybe he has 20 guitars or 60 guitars or 10 guitars that are more conventional. Maybe he's continuing to shop because he's got, he has the means, and he's looking for something new. I don't need another Tele. I don't need another Junior or Special. I like this thing that's headless. Oh, I've seen a lot of the metal. I've seen Tosin Obasi playing that crazy multi-scale thing that he plays. I wonder what that's all about. I'm going to try it. So I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I'm okay with, I don't know. And I was curious, though. It's been a while since you and I talked. I'm like, I'm seeing stuff. Well, so am I. That's what gets me up in the mornings because I want to know. But I don't know. So I'm still asking questions. Yeah, for me, it was just a very stimulating time that was also booked in by the fact that I was contacted by a collector to come and see his private collection, which sent me on a new trip. I was like, oh, well, while I'm on tour, there's lots of places that we're driving past. We were in 25 states over 5 weeks. We cover a lot of ground. And so, I'm thinking what opportunities exist as I'm driving through. And so we interviewed a couple of guitar makers while we're on the road, but this collector reached out to me. He has close to 900 guitars and has a private art gallery for his guitars. He doesn't live in this large house. The large house is for the guitars to be on display. They're not in cases. They're all out. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Why? Why do we do this? What's happening here? And so I thought, who else do I know that has some interesting collections? And I connected with a few collectors while we're on the road. I will release that content later on down the road. And then I was reminded by, when I was thinking on the topic of collecting, that George Gruen had said to me a number of years ago that he was concerned about the fact that people aren't collecting. And honestly, I don't think a lot about the act of collecting. I'm actually not a collector of things myself. I like to be rootless and travel all the time. And so I try not to have too many things I'm trying to care for. And that came back to me. So I thought, oh, we're passing through Nashville, so I'm going to reach out to George. And George and I had a conversation for a couple of hours. Actually, we release it tomorrow. That's to you. By the time this one's released, it'll already been released. So anyone who's listening who wants to know, there was a George Gruen interview on there where we talk about collecting. And George has some very strong opinions about collecting of boutique guitars and why they collect. And the point I want to get to here, what you were just talking about, is George opened up his shop in 1970 when a number of large companies who didn't have much to do with musical instruments bought musical instrument companies. So Fender was in the hands of CBS, Gibson was in the hands of Norlin, I think it was at the time. And Martin, was trying to crank out guitars at a level they hadn't previously. I think in the early 1970s, Martin was up to 30,000 pieces, but by 1983, they were down to like 3,000. It was a really big decline at this point. And there's a case for saying that quality went really far down during this period. And so George hits the retail scene in 1970 when the musicians, quite simply, they play their friends' guitars, they play an old Martin, they play an old Gibson, they come in, I'm ready to buy a Martin, but they can't find a new one that they actually compete somehow, because they were not a little different, they were very, very different at that point. They were comparing the best they had made to possibly now the worst in their history from that sort of time period. And so people started doing the vintage guitar thing because they just needed good instruments, and the manufacturers were not focused on quality and performance. And that's the same period where people like Linda Manzer and, Jean Larrivee first, Jean Larrivee and Klein, and over in the UK, Andy Manson, and all these people are also starting to get into making acoustic instruments because there was something to improve upon at the time. The mass manufactured guitars coming out were something that did need improvement. And so George talks about this in a very clear way of that's when he hit the marketplace. But he also defines that not every old guitar is a better guitar. There are golden periods of this manufacturing. And some of those companies that have golden periods have periods that you don't want to be buying. He's very against buying guitars from certain periods from major manufacturers. He thinks that's ridiculous because for George, he's collecting he's reselling the vintage instruments that he believes perform at the highest standards. Not just antiques. They're not just old. They're high performance instruments. And so it's a really interesting interview to listen to because of George's experience and perspective, and also the fact that George and I have very different experiences in the marketplace from very different places. And so we don't often, we agree on a lot of things, but we also disagree on a lot of things or have different perspectives on it. And so there was a period that it meant to improve. But frankly, Martin, Taylor, these folks are making serious guitars these days. Martin is definitely making better guitars today than they made in the 1970s. Absolutely. They're improved. And they really do fit the needs of certain people. And so the sort of need to make an improved guitar that might have spawned the artisan guitar making in the steel string section in the 1970s and early 1980s, it's a different reason for selling now or buying these instruments. And so all of that changes. And I know you spend most of your time trying to dial in a specific, sort of trying to improve the recipe, as you say. But I'm talking to hundreds of guitar makers that are talking about what they're doing. And I'm looking at the similarities and commonalities across the marketplaces. The store owners told me on this tour that they can't rely on their own interests anymore like they used to. They used to buy things that they personally liked and wanted, and that worked for them. Their taste was the same as their customers. And I had 3 or 4 substantial retailers tell me they can no longer rely on their own interest to gauge what is happening in the marketplace. And therefore, they are taking more seriously the advice of their younger staff and even giving them some more buying decisions by her. And I'm seeing the effects of that in the marketplace. I'm seeing that shift because those interests of those younger people, as you said earlier on about, or it might be an interview I'm crossing over, but the experience of that next generation is different. They're okay with the idea of a pointy headstock, let's say, because it's always been there for them. If you're 40 years old today, there's always been Jackson and Ibanez guitars in the world. If you're older than that, there hasn't been, and you have a different perspective on it. You sometimes think those look funny, and that drives the market forward. And so, ultimately, I'm glad that you're focused on the recipe, and that you're dialing things in there. And Michael, I think that you've made a substantial contribution to the guitar world in what you do. I'm very happy that there is an identifiable Greenfield guitar. I recently spoke with someone about their reactions to their instrument. I said, well, you make a different guitar every time, which means you're gonna get it right and you're gonna get it wrong, but you don't get the benefit of momentum. You don't get the benefit of building upon your successes if you do something different every single time. And so I think it's very wise what you've done in building a business. And if your goal is to have every guitar, the next one be the best one because you're improving along the way, then putting some rails on that makes sense. Say, I'm going to work within this space, and then you can measure it scientifically and know that you're making improvements in a particular direction. But if your guitar making is tangential, different headstocks, different colors, different materials, different body shapes constantly, what the hell can you know? It's very hard to know. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's not cool, but it's really hard to know that you know if there's all of this sort of chaos and tangential thinking.
I agree. And that has been, there's so many things here now. That has been the reality of instrument making forever. You change one thing and you make 10 more instruments and you compare. So it's like, what did that thing change? Did it change anything? Did it make it better? Did it make it worse? Oh, maybe I need to put it back. Then change another thing. You can't change 20 things on a guitar. You can, but you don't know what's affecting the overall voice. You don't know what the goal is. So, again, going back to the music analogy, Paul McCartney just came through Montreal, played 2 nights. He played the hits. If Paul McCartney was, I'm sure he's still writing and creating, but people wanted Paul McCartney through all of his different eras. They wanted to hear the hits. And when, Gibson is still selling Les Pauls and I'm still selling the G1 and people expect it to sound a certain way. And they have a right for, that's what they're buying. They're expecting it to sound, feel, and play a certain way. People are expecting the Dreadnought to do a certain thing. And if it does something different, well, they're not going to buy dreadnoughts anymore. Whoever makes it, if it's a Gibson Dove, it doesn't matter, right? They're expecting a certain thing. You just cross the continent speaking to as many, and you are a collector. You're a collector of ideas. You're
Sure.
always
Yes.
talking to people, and you're collecting stories, you're collecting information, you're collecting ideas, and frankly, that's what you do. You're not manufacturing a thing, so that's your R&D, and that's what you collect. And I speak to, whenever I'm fortunate to be with, I don't want to say a real musician, let's just say somebody who's able to tour extensively, who's out there in the trenches, whether they're one of my clients or they're just an acquaintance who I know. I always like, what's going on out there? What are you seeing? Because it's all the same. Whatever's affecting them ultimately is going to affect me, because I'm making the tools for them. And whatever's affecting them is maybe a little bit of a reflection of what's going on in the music space. Because if their audience is shifting, well, the fashion is shifting, and maybe guitars aren't so cool anymore and people aren't interested. Post COVID, 1920, 1921, 2020, 2021.
2020, yeah.
There was an explosion in demand for guitars. Nobody could keep up. Everybody's waiting list, expanded, and the major manufacturers increased production and just couldn't keep up. That's all changed. And I mean, there are a lot of small shop guitar makers that they have day jobs now. And I mean, that's a whole other question. Are there too many guitar makers or not? But the point is, there was abundance for a long time. And many, because I speak to my suppliers, what's going on. And it's tough for my suppliers now, because the majors aren't buying anything, because their demand from their customer base has decreased. So they're making fewer guitars. They have huge inventories. They have wood, stuffed away in their warehouses. They don't need to rotate their inventory at this point because it's not moving. And a lot of small shop makers don't have the demand that they used to. So they have a day job and they're making guitars on the weekend. That's not bad. That's just what's going on. But I only do one thing at this point in my life. I'm a career guitar maker. That's all I do. 50 hours a week. Used to be 70 hours a week. I need to be aware of what's going on around me for all of the people who buy my guitars, professional or otherwise, where the musical trends are and how that relates to what I do. So far, it seems as though I could keep doing what I'm doing. So that's what I'm doing. And if I could completely ignored the musical trends, I mean, this isn't the case, but just, let's talk marketing. If I completely ignored those musical trends and there was a shift that I didn't address, well, eventually I'd be left behind. And interestingly enough, I watched your interview with the CEO of NAMM, because why wouldn't you? He's the CEO of NAMM. And I've noticed in the past 5 years, NAMM is acutely aware of what's going on the ground, and how the NAMM show itself, its function is changing. And 4 years ago or 5 years ago, whenever it was, you invited me to dinner with that fellow. Remember? Anyway,
Dan Moylan. He's the head of sales for NAMM, but he does more than just sales for them. He's one of their executive level sort of management. Yeah.
I couldn't understand why I was invited to the dinner. But I figured, okay, hey, I'm going to learn something. Let's go. And by the end of dinner, I totally understood. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I represent me, the little guy who's making 18 guitars a year, where the NAMM show is going. It's now, whether it's some small boutique pedal maker or a guy who's making 50 amps a year in his garage or the guitar maker who's making 8 guitars a year, we represent a significant slice of the marketplace. And it's not just the PRSs and the Taylors and the Fenders. And I mean, they're still very relevant, but they're not using the NAMM show the way they used to. They don't need, they used to come to the NAMM show with their order book, and one at a time, all of their clients would come and see all of their new offerings and place their orders for the next 6 months. It was a completely closed show. It wasn't open to the public at all. And now it's open to the public. It's open to influencers. It's open to YouTube creators and all kinds of media. And there are lots of small creators and small shops like myself there. And NAMM is aware of that, and they're moving with the times. So just as they are, we need to be aware of what's going on musically and in the marketplace and be sensitive to changes so that we don't get left behind. So far, perhaps what I'm doing has become a classic. I don't know. I've been doing it for long enough that I've established a thing. But if the market isn't interested in what I do anymore, well, I have a choice. I could either change what I do to address the market or shut down. So far, I'm still doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I have a... Well, first of all, let me address the NAMM thing, that NAMM is paying attention to you and should always be paying attention to you because, well, even just like a politician, if you just cater towards one sector, we're a whole. There's a lot of people pumping gas out there, and there's some people who run some big corporations who have a lot of influence, but they're both very important, and so the same thing happens. Probably a bad analogy, but the point is the music industry is full of artisans who make a few instruments a year, and people who work for factories, and people who work in the clubs, and people who box up the guitars and headphones in warehouses and ship them. They're all part of the music industry. That, and it only works because we have all of those. And so NAMM is very good at staying focused with the idea that all of that matters. And John Malinczak, the current CEO of NAMM, who's been there a few years now, but I think the average tenure for a NAMM CEO is something like 25 or 35 years. It's a career at that point in time, typically. And so he's new-ish, considering how long each person normally is there. And it's 125 years of NAMM this year in 2026. And so John has been very conscious to say, there's a lot of shifts going on, but we need to represent that person who's, working in the warehouse packing guitars every day, and he's there because he loves to play saxophone or guitar or whatever it happens to be, and so he's choosing to work in a warehouse that ships musical things because he cares about that culture, and that person is a NAMM member too. And so how do we first of all identify the needs of them, and then help take care of them, because they're all part of the musical instrument industry, which is what NAMM is about. And so they're very good at that. And so you were there. Well, I select who I bring to that dinner. So every year they asked me to dinner and say, feel free to invite, one or two of the guitar makers along with you. And so I think about who's coming to the show, and then I talk to Roberta about it, my wife, and we talk together about who we think, would benefit from it, would be a good conversation, would provide insights, and who would also enjoy, the conversation from all sides, who's going to contribute in some way to the conversation. And so, you're certainly someone who does good work and has an opinion and contributes. So check. Michael's coming. So,
I wanted to address something else that you spoke to earlier, the
mhm,
differences between, you know, well, major manufacturers' quality and then the folks like John Larrivee maybe addressing a lack of quality or a drop in quality from the majors. And I would argue that it's not at all new. Even in
mm,
the days of Stradivari or Amati,
mhm, mhm,
people have been making musical instruments on different levels for centuries and centuries. And many of these
mhm,
were entertainment for common folk. It's like
mhm,
everybody had a violin. And then there were guys
mhm,
who made the instruments for the royal palace. Then there were the
mhm,
guys who had smaller shops who were, although Amati's shop was making a lot of instruments, but relatively speaking, right, they were the factories of their
mhm,
time.
mhm. Yeah,
Then
yeah.
there were the shops who were making, for the aristocracy and for the wealthy and whatever. That's not new.
Mhm,
D'Angelico was making guitars better than Gibson. But he was a small shop, an individual guy, way before Larrivee. I don't know enough
mhm,
of the history. I mean, there were certainly always classical guitar makers who were
mhm,
making
mhm,
concert instruments for performers. And, the steel string thing, let's face it, really happened in the 1990s. Well, now it's happening even post 2010. I would say it's where my industry has exploded. Before that, it was kind of small. But
mhm,
I would say people have always had small shop production of musical instruments, be it flutes or harpsichords, and there have been, production houses. And
mhm.
they were addressing different parts of the market. And so it's Larrivee was the guy who was doing it in Canada in the 1960s. And then into the 1970s, he started expanding his shop when Linda and Grit and Tony Duggan Smith and that whole cohort
David
joined him.
Wren, so forth. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, yeah. And that evolved quite naturally, I think, because I've spoken with many of those first apprentices, and as I'm sure you have, but um, they all kind of wandered in and asked. He wasn't trying to
Right.
take over the world. People heard there's a guitar maker, and it's like, oh, that's interesting, and they went and tracked him down. And I think that many of them worked for basically nothing, so they could learn the skills from him
Yep.
and take it from there. Not because he wouldn't pay, but because it was not his idea to have employees.
Right.
it was people asking him if he would teach them. They said, "Well, I can't pay you," but they said, "It doesn't matter. I want to learn." So, okay, well, you
Yeah.
can come and learn. And now he does have a factory, and that went really big. And I think it's definitely smaller than it was at one point in time, but they continue to produce at volume. The Larrivee thing. There's a natural ebb and flow to these things. Um, but that's all wonderful. And yes, there have always been different qualities of things. It's how we compete. I don't know how often I have to say this, but I quote Raymond Loewy regularly because he said it so well. So if you take two products that are equal in quality, function, and price, they'll choose the better looking one. But you have to compete, first of all, in quality, function, and price. And so that's what's happening there, right? So the people who are making it for the palace are probably competing very heavily on both quality and function at that point in time. The price is less relevant at that stage. But there's plenty of people who are just trying to make a guitar cheaper than someone else, and but when you get to the top, you get an environment with your peers where it's everyone's making a really high quality, high functioning thing at roughly the same price. Then you have to compete on looks. That's all you got now at this point in time. Like your green archtop guitar, it's like how are you going to get their attention?
Yeah.
Because you got to get them to pick up your guitar, and when they do, you've already done the work to make sure it's a good guitar. But then you can stand out with some looks at that point in time, and that's funny because that waxes and wanes also because it gets really fancy. And then the way to stand out when everyone is fancy is to make a very simple guitar. Beautiful, clean, but not overly ornate. And then you'll be the contrast when everyone is ornate. And so that goes up and down and waxes and wanes with the flows and ebbs and flows of the marketplace and demand.
I think there's a final component, and that is your ability to produce a successful musical instrument. Not to toot my own horn, but I'll give you an example.
But that's the function. That's the quality and function part of that.
The point being, yes, there are a lot of people making really good guitars today. Absolutely. I completely agree.
As a guitar builder and a player, you have a sense for when something's working right. That's why so many of the world's best trust D'Addario. Unmatched tone, perfect intonation, and strings made to the tightest tolerances in the industry. That reputation is no accident. It's the result of 400 years of being obsessed with quality and innovation. D'Addario, when you know, you know.
Recently, somebody who works at one of the major guitar dealers approached me privately to commission a guitar. This is somebody who sees the best guitars in the world every day. And he said, so he plays everything. And he said, consistently, my instruments, just the way they sit in his lap and the way they feel in his hand, and they're consistent and they always feel the same. And sonically, they just do what he wants them to do all the time. They need to be successful instruments. And I have worked, not tried. I've worked to develop a unique voice. And, if I just keep using this example, if you want a D28, I'm not your guy. And I'm not going to make my guitars sound like a D28. You came to me because I do my thing. So I think we need to be very aware. Price and ability and all of those other factors, but I deliver my product and it appeals to certain people. Be they collectors or school teachers.
Absolutely. And your instrument is very definable. If you're seeking sort of perfection, then Greenfield should be in your sights, because that's what you're seeking. And you produce a very, very refined, wonderful guitar. But there are different objectives sometimes, right? And so there's the reason that we need diversity is because, well, honky tonk or stride piano don't sound right on a Busendorfer. A concert grand isn't what you want to hear honky tonk on, and the guitar and the piano probably shouldn't even be perfectly in tune if you want to hear convincing honky tonk, on that piano. And so the idea of perfect for what? And so your guitar has a lot of possibilities. It's extremely clean. It's extremely balanced. It is actually the closest thing to a concert grand in an acoustic guitar that I know. If someone told me they were looking for that, I'm like, oh, have you played a Greenfield? That would be my first response, would be, have you played a Greenfield? If they want that kind of attack and note separation and clarity and fullness, I would be thinking Greenfield. And then the conversation would have to go somewhere else if they can't afford a Greenfield. Then we talk about degrees in that direction if you want. George and I talked about this also, George Gruen, in that interview, because George really has a very specific idea what he thinks is great and not. It's great for that era, great to reproduce that music. It's great for that thing. But I know people who don't connect with those guitars at all. I know people who have no interest in playing a pre-war Martin. It doesn't do what they need a guitar to do. Even though it's a great musical instrument, it doesn't do what they need it to do. Your guitar does things a pre-war Martin does not do. Which is the better guitar? Well, we can only decide which is there's no better guitar. They're better for accomplishing a specific goal, possibly. If you tell me you want to do this, that's right. And that's the wonderful thing about musical instruments, is that whole idea of possibility and expression. And so, I appreciate the work you do. I know musicians who own your instruments who are extremely satisfied with their guitars. I've had a chance to share your musical instruments with other people around the world, and you make a wonderful world-class guitar, second to none. Nobody makes a better guitar than Michael Greenfield. There's some people who make a different guitar than Michael Greenfield. But
so then, how does all of this circle back to headless guitars and multiscale instruments? And I mean, this is all fun and it's great, but
novelty.
Where is the marketplace going, if that actually means something? And then, is novelty important?
It is to some. Other people just want to know what they know. And they're going to, I remember showing acoustic guitars that were designed for stage performance in the Appalachian Mountains earlier in my career, more than a decade or two ago at this point in time. And the store owner said, "Son, that's a great guitar, but if it doesn't have a square headstock,
right,
my customers won't even pick it up."
Yeah. I've been there.
That's it, man. They won't even touch it. Yeah. And that's okay. They don't have to. There's lots of guitars out there with square headstocks on them. And that's okay. And they're wonderful instruments. And so I've enjoyed music played by musicians on many different musical instruments. And so really, for me, as you said, you talk with your suppliers, you talk with other friends and such, but there's probably a list. There's probably a short list when you're trying to talk to things. And really, I think what's happening here is it's one connector talking to another connector is probably the reason I thought to contact you at this moment. And sometimes you call someone up to say, "Hey, what's going on? You hear anything new?" And they're like, "No, not really." Like, okay. And it's not that you didn't contribute anything new, but it's me saying, "Wow, man, I just had this crazy experience where I see a seismic shift happening." And I'm not proclaiming the death of anything. I'm not saying that run for cover or or move to California and mine for gold. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying I've observed some things. It's one of the reasons I love getting out there and interacting with people all around the world and talking about our common obsession, the guitar, because I learn things from them and we see things in new perspectives. And so every once in a while, I just reach out to some people and say, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you hearing?" Because let me try and say this in the most complimentary way possible. You're aware and you do things.
Well, thank you.
And therefore, it's a worthy conversation. Typically, I enjoy my conversations with you.
Yeah, I always enjoy getting together. We're way overdue, by the way. I know you're in Europe right now, but
just come to Tuscany. I've got a guest room. Come on over.
We would love to. Hopefully, Judy and I are a little overwhelmed in our personal lives right now with elder care and stuff like that. So for the moment, we're not traveling anywhere, but the moment we're able, for our own mental health, we're out of there. And I know where you are. So we'll make that
where I
happen.
am. That's right. I've got a nice collection of wine, and I don't collect wine, Michael. It's meant to be used. Come on over.
That's right. An inventory. You're amassing an inventory.
That's right, a current inventory. It fluctuates.
Right. I mean, I seen... I besides speaking to people like you and my dealers and suppliers and artists, I speak to my peers. And some of my peers, I'm a pretty closed person in general. As I said, I live in my little bubble here at the Wood Nest, and I have maybe half a dozen people who I speak to on a regular basis. Some of them speak to many more people, and those people who I speak to tend to be top tier makers. So we're all, for the most part, serving the same demographic, but many of them are speaking to new people and up and coming people. And that's why I'm aware that there are, I just spoke to a close friend of mine just yesterday who's really out there talking to a lot of people. And, he said, it's really tough out there right now. I said, oh, really? Like, why are you saying that? And he was the one who said, yeah, there's lots of makers who are they're not building full time anymore. They can't.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't the case a couple of years ago. So that's the shift that I've seen. And there are more and more people, and I'm not making any kind of value judgment. It's just an observation. There are more and more people who are into guitar making, be it electric or acoustic, to create YouTube content or social media content. And really what they are content creators, and their content is guitar making, but they're not really guitar makers. So it's interesting. And I mean, that's a whole other conversation, about what that brings positively and detrimentally to our craft. But those are the things that I've seen in the last 2 years. And some of it I've seen because I consume social media like everyone else does. And some of it I've heard uncorroborated, other than the people who I tend to talk to aren't bullshitters. They're just like, if one or two of these people in particular tell me something, I totally believe them. They're not making it up.
Yeah. This is the interesting thing, is which ponds do you swim in? Where are you listening to things? Where are you interacting? Sometimes people ask me questions about the industry at large, and I have to remind them that I work in a very, very niche part of the industry, and so I'm industry adjacent to many of these companies, but I'm not I'm not exactly in the same space that they are. I'm not aware of some of those things in the same way. And the reality is, because I run the most discriminating guitar show in the world, that only invites people who are contributing something to the conversation, who are doing something who are elevating the craft, who are elevating the conversation. It means that I probably am communicating more with people who are actually succeeding in ways than I am with the average guitar maker. And so this is the part that I have to recognize. And, I remember listening to a couple of university professors. There's a podcast I like with Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter talking together, and they're both university professors. And one of them said that, statistically speaking, you never interact with this kind of level of intelligence, almost never. And the other guy was like, what do you mean? Of course I do. So, come on. You spend all your day talking to graduate students and professors, right? At an Ivy League school. Like, your idea of what is happening in the world, or reality, is very, very skewed towards a very specific sector in the world. And the reality is, me too, and I get out into the guitar stores. So one of the reasons I like going to guitar stores, and even though I go to very specialized guitar stores that can sell a high-end guitar, they still sell, mostly of them still sell average kind of products. And so I get to sort of touch base with more of the regular kind of marketplace in that sense, and the regular needs. And sometimes I love wandering into a little guitar shop in a small town and reminding myself that this is actually what's normal. Me going to Groons or Chicago Music Exchange or the Fellowship of Acoustics, these kinds of stores, these are not normal at all. This is not a normal representation of what a guitar shop is. Most guitar shops don't have a guitar in it that's above $1,000. If you just take them by quantity,
Right.
And so when we survey a marketplace, it's also important to remember who we're surveying. You know, in that conversation that came up many times now, sorry, I got it on my mind with George, you know, he talked about the quality of those early Jacksons were great, but he never sees them. I said, why would someone bring them to you to sell a used Jackson guitar? He's like, we can sell those guitars. I'm sure you can, but I have a used Jackson. Where am I going to take it to sell it? Nobody is thinking I'm going to take this to Grunes in Nashville to sell my shred guitar. It's just not... You don't see them because nobody would ever think to bring one to you unless they were completely oblivious to what a guitar store is and what your shop is. And so, you know, I try to be conscious of who I'm asking, what is their experience, what is reasonable sort of information to get from this person, what is their perspective on the matter, nobody knows everything, you know, and so I try and play with an open hand as much as possible to sort of say, this is what I've seen. What are you seeing? You know, let's talk about this. This is how I experience it. How do you experience it? You know, what do you like about guitars? Oh, I like this about guitars, you know, so on and so forth. And so I just consider it to be, I don't have another word for it. I'm going to use the word blessing. I'm not really sure I believe in blessing, but I'm going to use the word blessing to be able to communicate with people like yourself and many others who are willing to take my phone call or email and willing to have the conversation. And so, Michael, thank you for your contribution to the guitar in general, you know, for furthering our craft and the capacities of musical instruments who desire to do something more, who tell you, I can't do this. Can you help me get this done? I know that you have helped people do that, for your contribution to the guitar in general. My world is a better place for it, so I have to believe that it's the same for others. And so thank you.
Well,
and thanks for being on the show.
That's very humbling. And likewise, I mean, you do a lot for our community and you do a lot for the global understanding of the guitar, period. So you help further our work. And, you know, it's great that we do what we do, but we have to sell them. And the more people know about what we do, well, it makes it a little bit easier to do what we do. So that's what we do.
Yes.
It's a lot of what we do.
All right, Michael. Listen, if somebody wants to, is there something different about where they should see about your work? You know, greenfieldguitars.com at this point, your socials.
greenfieldguitars.com and my socials. You know, that's where I'm sort of trying to focus my marketing these days. I mean, and that's a whole other conversation, but the website at this point is a very expensive business card and it has some pictures of past work, because as a custom maker, there are really only suggestions of this is what a G1 looks like and this is what a G3 look like. But it's a place where, you know, my base price is listed and my contact information is listed, so you can get to me through the website and have a conversation.
Great. Okay. Well, Michael, again, thank you for being on Life with Strings Attached. I enjoy it. Hopefully we'll see you in person again sometime soon.
I look forward to that.
Yeah. Bye for now.
Bye.
You've been listening to Life with Strings Attached. If today's conversation meant something to you, consider passing it on. These stories find their place through the people who share them. A new episode comes out every Friday, right here, wherever you're listening. I'm Jamie Gale, and thanks for listening to Life with Strings Attached.